A very respected corporate partner said he had an interesting incident that happened a few weeks ago. Company had raised around, for argument's sake, 50 million, but a decent check. They were delighted, everything's great. Deal closed. The next day, the general counsel calls up the law firm partner, goes, okay, 50 million. Where do I put it? And the entire room went silent.
This is Money Never Sleeps. Sharp riffs, big ideas, and real insights from smart people. I'm Pete Townsend, GP at Norio Ventures. Let's go.
Money never sleeps, pal.
So my guest today spent the last decade inside some of the most complex financial institutions in the world. BlackRock, Silicon Valley Bank, the credit fund behemoth CQS. She's been in the room for 3 of the biggest systemic shocks of the last 5 years. And she's now building her own practice, advising on the kind of complex wind-down situations that don't come with a playbook. Sheila Lynch, welcome to Money Never Sleeps.
Hi, Pete. Thank you very much for having me.
Sheila, when you were in the room for those 3 major systemic shocks, specifically COVID at CQS, the Russian invasion while you were at BlackRock with live East European assets, and Silicon Valley Bank, those 3 rooms were all on the inside with big players. So how do those shocks translate into something relevant for startup founders?
So I'm a solicitor by training, and I was part of the in-house legal teams at these 3 organizations when these things happened. And while they sound like huge organizations, they're actually usually broken down into smaller units. And I was very much so at the cold face, given the point I was in my career. So I wasn't sitting in the room with the board of directors, but I was sitting there with the GCs, sitting there with the head of our teams, working out how the hell we're going to deal with this in real time in the people that we deal with. The CQS, COVID, we had quite a rocky time. We basically had bought credit protection on airlines and had a few other exposures that really kind of blew up in our face. So we lost 1/3 of our headline value. So I was in the legal team for BlackRock. I was looking after the public funds. So I was a primary legal contact for about 190 billion worth of highly liquid assets. And these are funds that all pension funds, insurance companies were invested into. And I was sitting there when Russia invaded Ukraine. I had some Russian and Eastern European exposure sitting in some of the funds that I was looking after. We had bigger exposures in other funds, but I was also similarly dealing with the market volatility that was coming with it, which when you're dealing with 190 billion is going to have a knock-on effect on the portfolio. And then I was at SVB, and yeah, I was in the room when a bank run happened. So what can you learn from these really, really big organizations that's actually relevant to small ones? And I'd say more than you think. There's a little bit of a tendency, I think, in startup land to be like, oh, I'm the first one doing this. This is this brand new business. But there's always an awful lot you can learn from the people that have come before you. And so I saw crises. And crises are a very interesting moment in an organization. And there's a great quote from a well-known sports coach. And he says, the sport does not build character. It reveals it. And it's the very same in a business context in terms of crisis. It doesn't build character, it reveals it. And what it reveals is what people have been trained to do. And what I've really learned is culture is absolutely everything, no matter the size of the organization, and how that is actually implemented. Not just in terms of like we do free pizza on a Friday, but in terms of actually how you're training people to respond and what behaviors are you actually rewarding. Because when things are breaking, you get to see how it's really built and how it really works. And when that crisis is happening, people are going to behave in the way that you've previously rewarded. And people are going to behave in the way they've been trained to do so. So if you've trained people to have good communication, if you've trained people to have good record keeping, if you've trained people to understand the systems and understand the processes, that will keep you afloat because you can't always exist in survival mode and you need some kind of architecture to keep you going.
Super interesting. Now, specifically with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, you saw startups' financial ups and downs up close, and probably a lot more than any individual startup founder has seen being in that room, Sheila. When we were talking about this last month, you had a story that opened my eyes to it.
So I was at a conference for VCGC, so general counsels in venture capital, and also high growth VCs. And a very respected corporate partner said he had an interesting incident that happened a few weeks ago. Company had raised around, for argument's sake, 50 million, but a decent check. And they were delighted, everything's great. Deal closed. The next day, the general counsel calls up the law firm partner, goes, okay, 50 million. Where do I put it? And the entire room went silent. And then everyone just kind of quietly smiled to themselves. And it was one of those fundamentally basic questions that people really forget to ask. A lot of startups, they're really focused on the raise. They're like, oh my God, we're going to raise this money, we're going to raise this money. And yeah, we're going to have this business plan for this money. This is how we're going to spend this money. But they're not thinking about the actual plumbing of when 50 million hits your bank account. So one, inflation is really high at the moment. So the minute it hits your bank account in pure cash, you're losing 3.6 to 4% of the spending power of that 50 million instantly if you're not managing the money. And secondly, you had a business plan. Like when you went out to VC, you had a business plan. It's like, right, I'm going to spend this money. But I hate to break it to you, nobody can spend 50 million in a week. And if you are, you're maybe some weird data infrastructure thing, but even then it's not going out the door in a week. You need to plan for that money. So when you're going for your raise, you need to go talk to your bank manager and say, hey, we're going to get 50 million. What treasury function do you offer? Which is something that a lot of startup founders aren't really aware of. And that the whole crisis at Silicon Valley Bank really brought that to the fore. Because it makes a lot of financial sense to have all your money with one bank, because then you are a bigger client, you get better rates, you get the whole array of services. But then you need to also be talking treasury management with that bank and it not just sitting there in cash. And there is a tendency for founders to want it to sit there in cash. And there's also a certain amount you need in cash for payroll, etc. But money management is key. And a really interesting example of this is supermarkets. They have huge amounts of cash move in and out of their bank account daily, massive amounts. They all use money market funds. They are incredibly sharp on cash management, and they are incredibly tight margin businesses, and they are so good at it and so all over it. It's all about the nuts and bolts, because there's this tendency to think, oh, I've got this money, this is super exciting. But it's all of the plumbing that makes the money move from A to B. I've been on really, really large syndicated transactions, like massive bank loans, where closings were delayed because some of the names on the docs and the register didn't match up. Now, eventually we were able to get the bank comfortable, etc. But those kind of small details matter so much. And that's the kind of KYC, AML stuff that people view as box ticking, but that will stop a bank wire doing a wire.
Oh, it will. It definitely will. Some of the other things we talked about, Sheila, were, that can go wrong and that may impact the company, were things like just treating legal as a checkbox, perhaps a wind down plan that sits on a shelf and it's never tested, equity structures that aren't optimized. These types of things can cause real problems. What are the impacts to the company for whether it's those specific things or other things that you've had experience with?
I think one of the big ones to think about is actually what is called contract debt. So there's World Commercial Council. They say there's a huge amount of value lost in poor contract management. They estimate about 8.6% of annual revenue. And it's higher for even more complicated industries that are more heavily contractual or technical. What this actually means in real terms is, classic one, you're gearing up, you're saying, okay, we've got 30 million of ARR. Okay, that's great. But actually, let's dig in. What percentage of those contracts have a 30-day termination clause in them for no reason whatsoever? Suddenly your revenue isn't so sticky, and suddenly that 30 million ARR can be chipped away very, very quickly. Like, what kind of indemnities and liabilities do you have buried in it? Again, these are things lawyers really care about, but they have very, very real impacts. And very large firms even get this wrong. So JP Morgan bought a fintech a while back. It was looking at student loans and startups, and the founder's name, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it was Charlie Jarvik. So basically they ended up suing her, and there was a lot of stuff going on because she faked the numbers. Because of the indemnity for her acting as a corporate actor in the original docs, JP Morgan were paying for her defense until the final judgment.
Yeah, so she got it right.
She got the right protection for herself, but JP Morgan were paying for incredibly expensive New York lawyers to sue them. Sorry, not to sue them, to defend her to the nth degree.
Yeah. She got the legal docs right, but she didn't get the business right. So
yes, exactly. She did fake her numbers, which is a slightly bigger problem than just, having tidy legal docs. I put that in a slightly different bucket. But, fundamentals. I talk about basics a lot, but I do operate in the assumption that you're not committing fraud and that you actually are selling something that has value.
This brings to mind the chat that I had recently with Eric Ries from the Lean Startup and his new book, Incorruptible. And we talked about building the right governance to protect the soul of the company. and that the company's founder is like a film director. The film director is there to protect the soul of the film. The company's founder is there to protect the soul of the company. Now, matching soul up with legal things probably doesn't really always jive, because how big do you need to get a legal document to protect a soul? I don't know if that's ever been proven in court or ever will be, for that matter. But you can do a lot of things right on the legal and operational side from day one.
I would say, firstly, legal is kind of the stitching that holds it together, because you're in a company and a company is a legal entity and you have directors and they have legal responsibilities. It's something that you need to build in from the very beginning. And I particularly mention directors because some of those founders, this might be the first time that they are the director of a company, and they may not fully appreciate what that means and the duties and the responsibilities that comes with it. And I would say very much so, if you guys are going down that path, you have a responsibility to each other and to yourselves to get the training and to understand fully what that means. You need to understand what your obligation to the company is. And then when you are in that gray zone, you need to understand when your duties are actually to the creditors of the company. You need to realize what obligations are on you that could bite personally, because there are personal risks for breaches of company law and tax, and also some of the breaches, particularly around insolvency legislation. So that's a really, really big one. The other one that I would say from the very, very beginning is you kind of need somebody in the middle. There's always this like, oh, I have a technical founder and I have a sales guy. You need somebody who makes sure the bills are paid on time and the lights are kept on. You need somebody who actually understands the nuts and bolts of how businesses are run. And again, there's this tendency to be like, oh, but I'm finding this tech company. The guy who runs the petrol station on the corner knows far more about the logistics of day-to-day running a business, and actually can tell you some very useful information in terms of cash flow and how you manage that. So yes, you're a GTM and a lot of the aspects are going to be really different with the tech product, but the very fundamentals in terms of cash management, vendor management, and who my creditors are and directors' duties are fundamentally the same. Like a really basic one, who are my vendors, track when the contract started, and track the renewal dates. In the same way, when you sign up for a free trial with something for your own personal finances, you put a calendar reminder to cancel it so you don't get locked into pay. Exact same for your company. Look at when it terminates, look when the renewal period is, see when you have an opportunity to renegotiate. Look at your payment schedule. Like, am I getting all of my money on the 28th, but I owe all my creditors on the 24th? If you can negotiate to reverse that, life is a lot easier instantly.
Is there one thing that you wish every founder knew before they sign their first term sheet?
That having a contract and having it properly laid out is not an attack on you. It doesn't mean we don't trust you. That I think it's actually very toxic to operate in assumptions, and actually properly fleshing out everything that's going to happen is far more useful than working under assumptions. And that when you're taking an investment as a founder, that's a long-term relationship. So the term sheet is the very first step, and then you have all of the docs and all of the due diligence. So there's a little bit of a gap. And I don't think founders realize how much there is a gap and how much work it takes to get to closing. But those docs are documenting a long-term relationship. And if they're investing with you for 3, 5, maybe even 10 years, every clause in that agreement is going to be examined and questioned at some point in time. So it's really worthwhile the time to go through it properly and set it up properly from the get-go.
Absolutely. Listen, Sheila, it sounds like a well-trained set of eyes looking over your shoulder can really help to point out these blind spots. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So I consult basically for financial institutions. I go in and help them look at their wind down plans, business continuity plan. I also come in for funds or fund managers when we're at stabilization, transition, or a wind down. So yeah, a few different hats. And then I also work for a fantastic credit fund, Partners for Growth. They are incredibly good at what they do. They've been going for 25 years and they do venture growth out of California.
All right. That's perfect. Well, listen, thank you, Sheila. It's been awesome talking through these things with you. Really appreciate you coming on to the show.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me, Pete.
And to all of you out there, thanks for watching and listening. Don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others to find the show, and it means a heck of a lot to me. Till next time, see ya.